ideas to be quite ambitious, aspirational. That we're talking of something as profound and abstract as math, and then linking it to the very everyday world of development, and how do you make that decision? So it was very curious. But then once I figured out mathematical sciences also includes computer science, kind of became a little more clear the connection. So how do we, take the world of science, technology, and link it to everyday problems? Because that is what ultimately is about realizing this goal of a developed Bharat. What I would like to share today is largely from my experience working in different domains over the last few decades. And thanks to that very kind introduction, I'll expand a little bit on my background because a lot of what I talk about will emerge from that background. So bear with me as we go through this. Usually I've given talks which are like 15-20 minutes long, and today the challenge is going to be over to talk for 15 minutes, so let's see how that goes. The vision of a developed India, developed Bharat, as outlined by the Prime Minister, I think the key or crucial element to that is going to be technology, because unless we make technology central to that vision, I don't think we will reach where we need to be as a nation. So I think that kind of makes it very crucial for this audience and similar audiences in different parts of the country to think about how do we link technology innovation to solving some of the challenges that we have as a nation, which will basically accelerate our path to development. And I think mathematical sciences are going to be foundational, especially with what's happening with computer science, artificial intelligence, what is coming down the road with quantum computing. You look at entire sunrise, the range of sunrise sectors, be it space, be it drones, where we are seeing for the first time a lot of activity from the private sector, a lot of innovation from the private sector in India. All of that is going to entail math in very foundational ways. So in that sense, I think this course will be at the heart of the kind of change that we will see across the country in the years to come. So how do we take ideas from the lab to the market? I think that is what I thought would be an interesting topic for today. And this sits right in between the abstract world of ideas and the real world of commercial products and solutions. And there's quite a wide gap between these two. And as I look back at my own personal journey and professional journey, a lot of what I ended up working on was in bridging that gap for various reasons. And I'll talk about that as we go along. So let me begin with a part of the bio that I didn't share with you. So I am actually a chemical engineer from IT. So many of you would wonder how did a chemical engineer end up in the world of media. So I took quite a few turns along the way. So I'll talk about that. In fact, my first job was here in Delhi at Engineers India. In fact, I was just recalling that I remember giving the entrance to the Faculty of Management Science when I came to Delhi University in 1995-96. So that was probably the first time I came to this campus. In those days, there was no public internet. We call public internet came to India probably in 96 when what was then BSNL or Desh Sanchar Nigam. They launched dial-up internet access. So before that, if you had to access the internet, it was through what was called ERNet, Educational Research Network. ERNet was available in a few IITs, IISc, a few universities, and a few R&D organizations. So when I landed up in Delhi at EIM, it was kind of an interesting work of fate that I was put in not at the headquarters in the Galinama place or at the process department, which was the most coveted department for chemical engineers back then, because of Sansad. Instead, I was put in the R&D center in Gurgaon. At that time, Gurgaon was practically and interestingly, the R&D center of EIL at Gurgaon had the access to the internet through EIL, but nobody knew how to use it. So I was right to join and decide, I had to go figure out how we can use the internet. So those days I would go to CGO complex to the Department of Electronics to figure out how to set up a dial-up modem so we can access the internet sitting in Gurgaon. And that kind of took me down a very interesting journey. So those days, the pollution around the Taj Mahal was a big issue, and Supreme Court was monitoring the whole issue of air quality around the Taj Mahal. And EIL was tasked with collecting the air quality data and doing some modeling. So they wanted some software, and that software was available only on the internet back then. This was 95, 96 around. So to download that software, they needed internet access. So I had to set up this dial-up mode, and that was at 14.4 kbps, so you can imagine, and the telephone lines were very, very unreliable. So it took me like a week to download this piece of software in bits and pieces. And so it was a very interesting experience, and I started getting exposed to the possibilities of what is possible with the internet back then. And I realized I was going to be a very bad chemical engineer. So that was the first shift that happened in my career. So I decided to move to IT, and I moved from Delhi to Bangalore. But along the way, I picked up an interesting lesson that you will have to start thinking laterally, unconventionally, if you have to learn new domains and if you have to innovate. So coming from a chemical engineering background, making that switch to IT, understanding all these possibilities of the internet was one of the first learning experiences that I had on how to make that switch. This kind of helped me over the years as I moved from one domain to the other. What I noticed was that most technologies go through a hype cycle. Back in the mid-90s, it was the internet, it was after that e-commerce, and then of course mobile internet became the buzzword and so on. So every few years there was a hype curve around the new technology. And luckily I was exposed to many of these emerging technologies right in their beginning. So when I moved from Delhi to Bangalore, I joined Infosys. And at that time, Infosys was incubated within its own environment to look at the mobile internet. And to me, that was a very, very enriching experience because I was barely 3 years into the IT sector. And to get an opportunity to work in a startup within a big environment, big corporation, is a very unique experience because you get all the exposure and learning without any of the risk. So that was a very enriching 3 years. And what I learned during that period was that when you have a new technology, despite all the hype, despite all the buzz around it, unless you find very real, meaningful applications that create value, the technology around it. And I saw this as a very recurring phenomenon over the years. I've looked at different technologies. It was around 2001, when the mobile internet was the first back then by around 2003, I got involved with another emerging technology called RFID. At that time, there was a lot of interest to see how ultra high frequency RFID can be used to automate supply chains. So, very different domain coming from the mobile internet. So, there was an initiative called the Electronic Product Code, where you would put RFID tags on various products. It could be clothes, it could be razors, it could be food packaging, whatever name. And be able to track the products right from manufacturing to the warehouses to the retail stores. So this was a very unique application of an emerging technology in a domain which is perhaps at that point in time, the use of technology was not that widespread. One of the learnings that came from this entire exercise was how hard it is to bring change across an industry by bringing in the very disruptive, which has the potential to change things in terms of how people work. Because not only it is about finding use for the technology within, let's say, a Walmart store or a Gillette manufacturing plant, it is also how do you get the Gillette and the Walmart to collaborate, exchange information. Because unless they are exchanging information in a format that both of them understand, this technology will not work. So it kind of brought out the aspect that to introduce a new technology, it is not merely enough to find applications within your four walls, but you also have to have a collaborative environment where there are common standards, common information formats that allow for this technology to flow from one end of the value chain all the way to the other end. So that poses, creates its own challenge because you have to put in place industry body and standards organizations that will work and collaborate between startups, the big manufacturers, the big retailers, and these are large organizations where decision making takes forever. And to get all of them to agree on the standards and to work with smaller companies, which are tech companies, is quite a learning experience there, and that tells you what goes into taking an idea from a lab into the real world market. Interestingly, a couple of patents that I have are in this domain of using RFID to monitor products. And one of the interesting applications at that time that we had worked on was on cardio stents, because a lot of these hospitals have these cardio stents which are very expensive, and they have a shelf life with an expiry date, and their challenge is to keep an inventory always in the hospital. Different sizes of cardio stents. But then how do you do that where, because you don't know what patient needs will come up. So you have to have a mix of these, and you have to manage it in such a way that they don't expire, because then that's a loss, significant value loss. So we have created this very interesting product. So it is a box which would have all these cardio stents. Each of the cardio stents would have an RFID tag on them, and there would be a wireless antenna that would monitor. And attached to the wireless antenna is a GPRS modem that would give a real-time update on the inventory of the cardio stents in that box. And to do this at Infosys was quite a leap, because Infosys, as you know, is an IT services company. Typically, you have people who are trained in COBOL programming, web programming, and they're just providing software services. So to do something like this, it is a hardware, software, garage operation in a large corporation like Infosys was quite a revolutionary thing. And most people who don't even understand what are these guys doing in this corner of the company. And then we created this box, and it was used by Johnson & Johnson to monitor their cardio stents in hospitals in India. So it was one of the first applications of RFID used with mobile data. This is, I'm talking about back in 2006, 2007. So very pioneering at that point in time. Another interesting application, again, taking the same concept, was in the world of horse racing. So in the US, there are 3 horse races which are considered very important. One of them is called the Kentucky Derby, where there's a names. So in the US, betting on horse racing is illegal, and one of the challenges for the people who do betting is that they need real data on how the race is progressed, so that they can place bets. So Kentucky Derby wanted to provide an additional data feed. So apart from how that horse probably ran in past races, what they wanted to do was, when the race was going on, they wanted to give the bettors a real-time feed of the progress of the race based on where the horse is and at what speed it is running, so that they can modify their bets while the race is on. So how do we do this? So we use what were called ultra-wideband sensors, which would sit on the horse, and these sensors would be tracked across the racetrack with antennas. So you triangulate it, you get a real-time location on the horse while the race is progressing. So it was a very interesting application. Again, from an Infosys standpoint, very revolutionary because you typically work with large corporations doing IT services. This is the first time we actually went to Churchill Town, which is where the Kentucky Derby happens, and we actually worked with the horses to put these sensors and map the entire race course to monitor how the race progresses. So it was quite an interesting, innovative use of a new technology for doing real-time location tracking in a very different context. Interestingly, the same technology has been used in a very different domain to track people and assets in oil exploration. So one of the challenges in oil exploration is that when there is a disaster, when there is some incident, you need to know where people are, because you need to be able to evacuate them safely. And because the environment there is very heavily metallic, you can't use traditional wireless technologies to track what's happening within the oil facilities, be it an offshore platform or a refinery. So one of the use cases there was to give these ultra-wideband sensors to the staff to wear around their necks, so that at any point in time you know where they are in the facility. So if there is a disaster, if there is an accident, you know how where people are and you evacuate them safely. So from horses all the way to people, two very different kind of applications. The third application, which maybe some of you may have seen recently in some of the airports. I saw it in Chengdu airport in China some time back, and most recently in the Hyderabad airport. You would see that the carts have a display on them, and you can interact with it with the wireless display. You can look at what shops are there in the airport and get all that information. So we did a similar thing way back. This was 2008, 2009. Where we put these sensors on shopping carts in the US, where as you are going around shopping in a retail store in the US, we have these large retail stores where you could walk for 15-20 minutes through all the different aisles. So what happens is the wireless sensor tracks where the shopping cart is in the store, and based on that, the display comes alive and it tells you what promotions, what discounts, what products to take or buy. So it's a very interactive kind of shopping experience based on your location within this large retail store space. So different applications of wireless sensors that looked at how to create value in very, very different industries. Horse racing at one end, oil and gas safety at another end, retail stores. And what you see in each of these situations is how do we understand what the end user wants, what that particular application demands, or what that particular business context demands, and then adapting the same technology to each different contexts. So a large part of my years at Infosys was actually spent trying to figure out how to bring new technologies to the market, working with early adopters, which is very unlike traditional IT services. So our group at Infosys was kind of an anomaly, it was an exception, it was not a rule, because we were always dabbling in these new technologies. And along the way, I was kind of fortunate to that a lot of the interaction in these early technologies was with universities, and I think that is where what you're doing here becomes very important. Because often taking a new technology to the market is not very easy. There are problems to be solved, and those problems require expert inputs, support from a lab. You have to involve the academia and researchers. So, for example, when UHF a lot of the work was done at MIT, and in fact, one summer I actually spent time at MIT to work with them, figure this out. Similarly, some of the work that we did with data later on, especially the retail supply chain data, we had interaction with UCLA, Yale, the IITs here for the Johnson and Johnson example that I spoke about. So industry can't figure this out by themselves. They know there's a new technology out there. They know there's a lot of buzz around it. But there is a significant gap between making that technology work in their specific context, and that requires collaboration going beyond the four walls. But I think the constant is that you have to be bold to experiment. And unless you experiment with technology, you will not learn what are the possibilities. You would have thought you can monitor the heart rates in real time. So things like that. So what does it take to experiment with? I think the fundamental thing is that you have to take a leap of faith in what is possible with technology. And an interesting turning point for me was in 2013 when I quit Infosys and I joined this digital startup called Vempati. Not many may know about the digital, but it was a life-changing moment for me because Vempati Digital was set up as a digital platform to enable citizen engagement ahead of the 2014 elections. Back then, the Gujarat Chief Minister and Prime Minister, he was always a pioneer of experimenting with technologies. Many of you may know, he was one of the first to take to social media to communicate directly. He would just pretty much come from industry. His first communication on any subject would be through Twitter and Facebook. Similarly, he was one of the first to start live streaming his speeches on YouTube, bypassing the whole television channels. I remember in 2012, he was one of the first to host a Google Hangout, along with, I think it was Ajay Devgan and him doing the Google Hangout in 2012. And that day, it was supposed to start at about 7:30 p.m. India time, and it started an hour later at 8:30 p.m. because the YouTube servers were just not designed to handle the scale of traffic, and they just crashed for almost an hour. Now, normally, any politician would not take that kind of a risk because they would be very, very conscious of this thing work, keep doing it. Right? The one thing that I saw with the story is that he's not afraid of experimenting. And that makes him kind of very pioneering individual in that sense, that he's okay to take those risks, take those chances with innovative technology. Which is why in 2014 election, if you see, remember, there were 3D rallies where his holographic video projected and at the same time he was talking in 38 locations. So using technology for citizen engagement was an innovative first in the 2014 elections. And I was fortunate to have worked in the digital to write this experiment. And at that time, we had created what was the first internet radio station. Because even though Mr. Modi's speeches were live streamed on YouTube, not enough people had high-speed internet access. So it was very difficult for them to watch live videos on their computers, or in fact, mobile phones were not even that ubiquitous in terms of being able to watch live videos. So most people probably watched it on their laptops or computers, and they didn't have that good internet access. So we quickly realized that there was a lot more value in giving an audio feed live on the internet. So we created this internet radio service, which became very popular because a lot of people would tune in to listen to the audio speech because it just required a very low bandwidth. So that was one innovation that was to adapt to the real world constraints. Another thing that we did was we, for the first time, created a volunteer platform online where people would get engaged with the campaign itself. Again, normally for professionals or students, it's quite a barrier to get involved with a campaign. What the volunteer platform did was it just lowered the barrier. It made it easy for people to get associated. Now, almost 10 years later, you see that this is now become a norm across the board. Every political formation now using social media, WhatsApp, various tools to engage with the volunteer campaigns. 2014 was the pioneering first step of the time. In fact, we went beyond just doing speeches and social media. For the first time, we were crowdsourcing inputs of speeches. So I recall one of the famous speeches was when Mr. Modi came to SRC to interact with the students back then. And so we asked the students to give their inputs. What should we talk about through this volunteer platform? And we were flooded with all kinds of input and all kinds of comments. How do you analyze this? Because in any, ahead of every speech, the volume of comments that would come was in hundreds and thousands. And there was no efficient way to analyze all these comments because they would sometimes be in English, sometimes in Hindi, sometimes it's a mixture of two, sometimes it's a transliteration of Hindi, the English alphabet. Right? So how do you analyze all those? And I recall that was the first time we actually thought of using AI. Can we use AI to do it? And this is way ahead of us, right? 2014 we're talking about. So we collaborated with Professor Amit Shea, who's at South Carolina University, I think he's still there, one of the AI researchers. And his PhD student and some of the students came up with this tool where they would take our text files, we would download them and use them as a CSV file. And they would use their AI algorithms to analyze what comments are coming. And then they would try to identify some common keywords or key phrases which were occurring most frequently, so that we get an idea of what are the top of the mind issues that people are flagging. So that was one of the first attempt at trying to use AI to analyze what was being said by the volunteers and people who were interested in the campaign. Of course, from there to 2024, I think we've come a long way. As you would have seen recently, Mr. Modi was using AI to translate his speeches into multiple languages. So it's, I think, a huge evolution in 10 years. What is remarkable about this 10-year period is that he has not been shy of experimenting with new technology. And I think that is a very crucial element of taking any new technology from the lab to the real world, that you need early adopters who are not afraid of experimenting. They are able to overcome the fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of embarrassment. I think that becomes very crucial and important. The other important aspect of taking technology from the lab, apart from experimenting, is you need to be able to think unconventionally and connect dots across ways. Because unless you are able to make these connections across the ways, you will not figure out the possibilities. You will not know where else can I use something. And this happened to me when I made the transition from digital media to public broadcasting. In 2016, I joined the board of South Africa, and in 2017 I became the CEO. And to me that was a huge change, coming from having worked in the IT sector and in the digital media world to come to the broadcasting world. It was kind of going from 21st century work environment to a 20th century work environment. So when I joined, Doordarshan and All India Radio were operating as if they were still in the 1980s and 1990s. There was no IT. They were completely paper-based. Most of the technology was old, was not modernized, and they basically were not ready for the digital world or digital era. So to me, it was a very interesting and learning skill. How you motivate such an organization to still trapped in the last century and bring it to the current century? How do you modernize it? And what path do you take? Because most big organizations have gone through a certain evolution where they had mainframes, then they moved to internet-based systems, cloud, and AI. Now here you have an organization in the second decade of the 21st century, and it is still operating how organizations would operate back in the 80s and 90s. So you can't take the same sequential path anymore. So you have to leapfrog, and you have to skip a few steps and catch up with the current and latest technology. And I think that is a big challenge. But unless you leapfrog, you will not modernize such a market. That was a key learning stage. How do you look for opportunities to innovate? And some of these are necessity or necessity, and some are circumstance. Because circumstance is forced. And one such big circumstance that emerged was COVID-19. COVID-19 forced everyone to change. You had no choice, right? Because you couldn't go to the studio, you couldn't sit there in the studio. Imagine the radio studios or TV studios. They're closed environments. There's no ventilation. So during COVID, you had to do a recording. It is like a very high risk exercise. How do you do it? But then if you don't do it, how do you deliver news? Because while the private sector was taking a break, while everyone else took a break because of the lockdown, Doordarshan and All India Radio had to work 24/7. I was pretty much at the office every single day. I had to take no lockdown because you had to deliver the news. People had to know what was going on with COVID-19, what precautions to take, what steps to take, and so on. So the staff had to think unconventionally to keep the operations going, and that forced a lot of innovation and change. They had to think of new ways of working. I recall one instance where the entire news team of All India Radio in Bhopal was down with COVID. How do you deliver news bulletins? So they figured out, sitting at home with their mobile phones, how to record a news bulletin and have it delivered to the studio so it can be broadcast. So people were forced to think unconventionally to respond to that situation. And a lot of innovation emerged during that period. It also helped with a lot of behavioral change. Because until then, Prasar Bharati was entirely paper-based. Files would come, people would process files. All decision making was based on contents of files. In 2019, I started the effort to move to a cloud-based electronic filing system. But there were no takers. People would not adopt it, would not change their habits. Once COVID-19 happened, they had no choice because most of them were not coming to the office. They were working from home. How do they process the content? The files are not processed. You don't get approvals for things that you want to do, money that you want to spend, permissions that you need. So they had no choice but to make the switch from paper-based files to cloud-based electronic files. And the beauty of the e-file system that we did at the office at Sabah was that, unlike the rest of the government, because ministries had this problem, even though some of them had adopted e-files, they still had to come to the office because they had no remote way of accessing the electronic e-filing system. While in the case of Prasar, we took another leap. We said we put it on the cloud. And because we put it on the cloud, it was accessible to people anywhere at any time. You could go on your mobile phone, right back, sitting at home, anywhere, sitting in the airport, and so on. So that kind of lowered the barrier for people to access the e-office and be productive no matter who. And that was a huge cultural change in an organization which 3 years prior was still operating as if it was in the 1980s and 90s. So that was a very interesting project for me personally because there was such resistance from within the organization that people would not adopt. And I had to literally refuse to sign on files. I would just send them back saying, unless you submit it electronically, I will not approve. And that kind of forced a lot of the mid-layer leadership to change their habits. And that's how technology got adopted. Another interesting experiment that we did during COVID was to launch this app called News on AIR. I don't know, some of you may have seen it or used it. It was a very interesting experiment because what traditionally happens with radio is that unless you're in a city, you can listen to the radio station of that city. So if you're in Delhi, you get to listen to FM radio, Hindu of Delhi or Mumbai and so on. What we did with News on AIR was that we put all the 200 radio streams of our radio online on the cloud. So through one app, we could pick the station of any city and listen to the radio station. and to do this in anywhere in the world. And then that kind of dramatically changed how radio services were accessible across cities. And this kind of paved the way for Doordarshan and All India Radio to become ready for the digital era, become social media friendly. And we were able to phase out obsolete technologies and then bring in new digital technologies. All kinds of experiments were done, like putting cameras in radio studios, so you could see the voices, the faces behind the voices. What emerges from all of this is that you have to think about things. If you have to motivate an organization to change, you have to challenge their conventional ways of thinking. And for example, one of the biggest in this city, on your radio, why should we innovate? It's not our job to innovate. We are paid by the government. Our salary will come whether we do something or not do something. What is the motivation, your incentive to it? And to break that mindset, and to break that mindset is not easy. So you have to find ways to create an incentive for people to embrace change, to bring about a cultural shift. And more importantly, to think beyond their focus, to collaborate, build an ecosystem. And I think that becomes important to work with universities, work with startups, and be open to new ideas, and be open to experimentation. And there is no age bar to innovate. And this was a very interesting learning for me, that I was able to find a group of broadcast engineers within the Russian Nigeria who were in their late 50s, just about going to retire. And they were most passionate about programming. It's like a lot of the in-house software tools were developed by them. So there is actually no age bar to innovate, as long as you have that passion to learn and that passion to experiment. But then to take these ideas from the lab to the real world, you have to understand the constraints of the area. You have to understand what users need. Most of the time, many ideas fail because you've not spent enough time understanding what the end users need. What are the constraints of the real world? What do the end users want? And for that, design thinking is very, very critical. I work with a couple of research teams that I take hand to. Very, very interesting technologies they have developed. But then they are all sitting in the lab. They have not figured out how to make their research tools usable and user-friendly. Because unless they are usable and user-friendly, you will not get that kind of adoption and feedback. I mean, take the case of ChatGPT. The interface is so simple to use that it has opened it up to the entire world. Anybody can use it. It's so simple interface. I think that is the kind of design thinking that's very, very important. And a crucial element of design thinking is empathy. You have to be able to empathize with your end users. And without that, if you can't put yourself in their shoes and think like them, you will not get it right. And I think that is the big gap that exists between the lab and the market. Because innovators are too far removed from the other. And we need to bring all of this together. First, in a country like India, we have a lot of resource constraints. We can't invest in the kind of, look at OpenAI, the kind of investment they're able to come out running into billions of dollars. Unless you put that kind of investment, you can build products or platforms of that scale. So in India, we have to think innovative. Our approach has to be different. We have to think how can we leapfrog, how can we be frugal, at the same time be competitive. And I think that is going to be a unique challenge. And we have to find ways. And I was just sharing with Professor Vivek that, for example, at IIIT, there was a student who figured out a model to solve geometry problems from the International Maths Olympiad. And that AI model doesn't require GPUs, they're able to run it on normal CPUs. So approaches of this kind, where we don't have to have these resource-intensive, heavy infrastructure footprint innovations, will be very, very crucial for India. And I think if we are talking about Viksit development, our approach has to be more leapfrog, more innovative, find pathways which are not necessarily what the rest of the world has taken. And I think that's how we'll achieve this vision. Once again, thank you for being very, very patient.
for the vision, what we are talking about today, the 2047. So, when you see the development in Indian firms or companies, the consumption of the technologies by the companies. So, how you see the balance between that? Because for the development countries, not need only the consumption by the technology, rather they need to have a development. But there is I see the different challenges that so many companies are going down and so many companies have been closed up. So, what you see in this regard, the development and the consumption of the technologies, and how you scale the India in this regard?
I think it's a very interesting question because India is a fast adopter. ChatGPT got launched in the US. I don't know the number of people in India who claim already using ChatGPT. So we are very good at adopting technology, and that way, if you look at consumption of technology, I think we are second to none in that sense. We are almost on par with developed countries. Because thanks to the internet, thanks to the cloud, the barriers have been removed. I remember in mid-90s when I was a student, to get access to technology was a huge challenge because it had to be imported physically. There were so many barriers. Today those barriers are reached. So in that sense, we are able to consume technology on par with pretty much everywhere. Yeah, there are some artificial constraints like this GPU shortage and so on, but they will go with it. It's a matter of time. Where the gap exists is what you rightly pointed out is in development of technology. Because we are very good at application software. We are very good at developing something which doesn't require core technology. It's not deep tech, but it's building on what others have done. So there we have a very strong strength, and of course we have the largest talent pool. For example, there is a report that McKinsey put up last year on quantum technology, and they ranked various countries in terms of which country is ready for quantum technology. In terms of talent, India was the highest because we have the largest pool of engineering. So in that sense, we are quite good with talent. We are quite good with applications. Where our gap is with hardcore research and hardcore deep tech, because there the investments are larger, the risk is higher, and you have to have an appetite for what is called risk-tolerant investing. Go back and look at the history of Silicon Valley. A lot of what happened in Silicon Valley in the 1980s was because you had venture capitalists who were willing to take that risk, and you had defense applications who needed that technology. So that combination worked for them, and that is how, if you look at VLSI, Internet, all of them are products of that environment. So we have to create a similar environment here. So some of the new initiatives like the National Research Foundation, this new approach for defense research, I think should hopefully solve that. Bridge that gap. That is where our gap is. Any other questions?
Sorry. Actually, you talked about taking the ideas from labs to the market, and as if someone is doing PhD in his initial years, so what he should think to take his ideas at that stage means some are senior professors, senior scientists. They have the way how to contact the company, but as a PhD researcher, so what should be the
So I would say, don't think of yourself as a PhD researcher. Think of yourself as an innovator. If you see a real problem that perhaps can be solved with whatever technology that you're working, there are several avenues today. A lot of the institutes have the incubators where early stage ideas can be most of the IITs have had a university profit. Right? I think that would be the right place to collaborate with them. Also now there are many government programs where they are asking you to come up with ideas which they will fund, right? Like the Science Secretary just put out a call for innovations in electric vehicles, battery and energy storage. Right? Similarly, the India AI initiative, which is once I think elections are roll up, will have all kinds of projects that will be put up for people to submit ideas. So I don't think there is a bar in terms of whether you're a PhD or an undergraduate. As long as you have interesting ideas, you can solve it.
Sir, actually, during PhD, we have a pressure to complete everything in some specific years. If On the other stage, if we are established in some like institute or as a faculty or scientist, so there we have time, means we can experiment in terms and we can see if it works or not. If it doesn't work, so they don't have any problem, means they can start new things. But being in PhD, we have a pressure to complete it in the given time. So that's why I was asking in this.
Well, I think that's an interesting aspect which perhaps has to be sought within the organization, right, within your institute. You should look at how can you incentivize a doctoral student to also maybe incubate something. I know that, for example, at IITs it happens quite a lot, where a lot of the ideas do get incubated within their startup institute. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shashi, for spending your valuable time and being with us here. What we could listen today is something that that we never get a chance to listen in a classroom or in a workshop or seminar where we are taught with a lot of concepts, how to implement them, and things like this. So what you talked about is the life journey and how this has been very closely associated with the technological development. I remember, what the kind of technological situation that was there in 2006, 2008, and now what we see now. So it's a tremendous change. And as Shashi advised, it's always important that if you have an idea, it's always if you want to realize it, you have to be passionate about it and you have to be ready to take risks. And about the point that you mentioned, I heard Professor Ram Gopal Rao once mentioning, he was the former IT director. He said that if you pick up a research problem from literature, it will end up in literature. But if you pick up a research problem from society, it will end up in society. So that is where the kind of problems that you pick up for your PhD research matters a lot. And if you're connected to the society, if you're connected to the country, and you think of a problem which could be worked out, which needs attention, that is where your passion lies in. So if you see it as just near a degree or something where you just need to publish certain papers and get a degree, it will end up in literature for sure. But if you're passionate about a problem, if you've seen it in your village, if you've seen it in your city, or something that you have encountered and you start working with that, it's going to end up in a fruitful solution. So it's very important. Thank you very much once again, Shashi, for being here. And may I give a token of remembrance for being here with us. Shashi.